Welcome to the 5th season of the Urban Agenda. I'm David R. Jones, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Community Service Society of New York, a private not-for-profit organization dedicated to improving the lives of those in poverty. We see a trend these days for government to shift the burden of helping the poor and onto private charities and church organizations. Will it work? To discuss this and other issues, I am pleased to have as our guest the Reverend Calvin O, pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. As spiritual leader of one of the city's largest African-American congregations, since 1989, Dr. Butts has developed housing for the homeless and senior citizens in Harlem and spearheaded boycotts against New York institutions for their racist policies. He gained national prominence with a campaign to eliminate negative billboard advertising in minority communities that was copied in cities across the country. Dr. Butts, well, what do you think? Can government shift the burden to churches and not-for-profits?
It can if it will give us the tax money.
You think that's likely? They're going to give us the money too?
Of course not.
Yeah.
I think that's the real issue. Community Service Society, Abyssinian Baptist Church, and a number of other churches and organizations have the potential, in terms of the human potential, to do service delivery for those who might be categorized as the least of these in biblical terms. But without the resources in terms of money, we can't do it. So if I could take the tax dollars or get a significant portion of the tax dollars paid by the citizens of this city, state, or nation, and those tax dollars could be used to fuel our programs, I think we might be able to do even a better job. I know we could do a better job than government. But we have to convince government, which is unlikely, that we deserve a significant, not just a pending portion, a significant portion of the tax dollars in order to do our work. That's what some of us lobby for, however. I mean, we're always pressuring churches, not-for-profits, pressuring the government to channel funds into our programs, whether it's to build housing, whether it's to create community centers, whether it's to do scholarship programs, whatever it is. But simply put, it's not enough money.
Right. Well, I know the Abyssinian Development Corporation has really flowered under your leadership. Can you tell our audience a little about what you've undertaken?
Well, the church, being in central Harlem and looking around its community, noticed very easily that housing is deteriorating and that there are a number of services that the community needs and doesn't have. A supermarket, even a place to have a sweet 16 birthday party for your daughter, non-existent in Harlem. And so a school, a decent school, District 5 has one of the worst records in the city, and I would dare say in the nation. So we've had to focus on all of these issues and more. Commercial development, it's pitiful the number of people of African descent who own businesses, very small. So therefore we are not able to employ our own children. Looking at these things, the church decided that we had to become more deeply involved. So we put together the Abyssinian Development Corporation under the leadership of a young woman named Karen Phillips. And I think that's crucial to any organization, but especially a church. Pastors have a desire to serve and to do, but pastors themselves do not have all the skills. And what we are fortunate to have is a congregation filled with some very skillful people, Karen Phillips being one. We received a basic operation grant from an organization called LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, $50,000. And now we're worth close to $50 million or above in terms of property and other kinds of assets. So it's been a wonderful experience. We've developed over 500 units of housing. How much over, I really don't know right now. We are in the process of building the Pathmark supermarket along with East Harlem Triangle at 125th, 3rd, and Lexington. Right. And that will happen, by the way. I'm glad to be on your show to tell everybody that it is going forward. We're doing the Renaissance Ballroom just to give people a place to dance, to recreate themselves, to have parties and wedding receptions and things of that nature. And of course we have the Thurgood Marshall Academy for Learning and Social Change, which just underwent a radical transformation under the leadership of a young woman named Dr. Sandy Johnson. So we are heavily involved, but we need resources. Our motto is to take public money and create private wealth. That might not be original with us, but it works for us. We like it.
In terms of the Pathmark, which I think many of our viewers may have heard something about it, I know there was some controversy over that. And there was some feeling, I think, among small bodega and grocery store owners that this might be a threat. What was your feeling in terms of how that worked out? Was there a suitable compromise worked out? Or?
I think there is a suitable compromise that's operational now.
Right.
And my only serious problem with the compromise is that it took us so long to get to it. Mm-hmm. I lay part of that at the door of the mayor. The mayor had a lot of pressure put on him by the Latino, particularly the Dominican community, about the fact that this large Pathmark would push some of the smaller store owners out of business. And it just took too long. I guess he had political considerations for us to come to the compromise whereby a community organization from East Harlem, it would probably be Latino, it hasn't been identified yet, would own 49% of this project. Now, the way it stands right now, EDC, is Economic Development Commission, owns 49%, but it will transfer to the local community-based organization. Now, what that community-based organization is, I don't know. Who it is, I don't know. And many people are calling us, calling me, saying, Reverend Butts, you know, we want to be in on this, we want to have a piece of this, tell us. But that's not my responsibility. Yes. It belongs to Rudolph Giuliani. And I refuse to take the weight for that. He has got to be the one with whom they negotiate on this. Right. Our desire is simply to get the Pathmark up and operational. Why? Because on the east side, we have a fairway on the west side, but on the east side, there is nowhere where people can get fair prices and quality foods. The smaller store owners, some of them will be forced out. Some of them will do very well, however. And then when you say Pathmark gets a corner on the market, well, White Rose and Crasdale generally have a corner on the market now, dealing with the smaller bodega owners, quote unquote. Now, that Pathmark will open up the way for other larger chains to set up operation in our communities. Mm-hmm. I don't want to see our communities overrun by them, but I certainly think when you note the number of people who leave our communities to go across the bridge into New Jersey, to go out on the island, or to go downtown to shop in these larger chain stores, it makes sense for us to keep this kind of money in the community itself.
You don't think there's going to be a permanent rift between the Dominican community and the African-American community on this issue?
I don't think so. I think that the conditions of our society, conditions of discrimination, particularly, will force us to work together. And this is an unfortunate rift, but I also think it's fueled by some unscrupulous politicians. You know, I'm trying to think of the city councilman who's down on the Lower East Side, and one in Harlem. The one in Harlem who gave us the most trouble was Adam IV, and Pagan down on the Lower East Side. And I just don't think that their reasons for fighting this were really in the best interest of that community. I think it had more to do with them trying to gain political strength for themselves.
Let's talk about, segue, what do you think of the state of African-American political leadership at this point? Are we developing enough new leaders to really cope with what seems to be a worsening condition for the very poor? That I know.
I don't think so, because I have not seen any, what I would call independent thinking, strong, young, all of these things have to go in the mix, political leaders on the horizon. You know, I'm always impressed by my city council person, C. Virginia Fields. I think she has a bright future, and I encourage her. But I am concerned that we don't see more and more of our young men and women coming up to challenge the entrenched political machinery that's there. Now, it's true that Charles Rangel is, I guess, the dean of the political leadership uptown and maybe across the city in terms of black political leadership. But I'm talking about even people who challenge that, because with all the things that Charles Rangel does, I mean, time marches on, and there's going to be a transferring of power or shift of power very shortly. And I don't see anyone who's really being trained, anybody who is thinking about what is New York City and the federal government going to look like in the 21st century. So I've got some deep concerns. That is not to say that men like David Patterson and Keith Wright and others in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Queens do not represent alternatives.
Right.
I just think that I'm looking for even greater alternatives outside of an already established political system.
Yeah, I know my father was one of the deans of the political leadership in Brooklyn and founded the club that Shirley came out of, Judge Thomas Jones. And it seems in some ways there was a more fertile ground for developing a new leadership. I have a theory, and I put it on everyone, and some people don't agree, that so much of our leadership may have been siphoned off by the potential to get lucrative jobs in the private sector. There was a sudden explosion of opportunity that may have stripped off people who not only could have served the community, but actually served themselves.
In politics, in not-for-profit leadership, and in church leadership. The lucrative positions in the commercial world have certainly hurt us, because more and more of our men and women are chasing not only the God of the 21st century, but the God of the 20th, 18th, and so 19th, 18th, and so on. It's the dollar.
Right.
And not only has it siphoned leadership from those institutions and organizations that could really lead the masses, quote, out of the darkness into the light, so to speak, but it has also siphoned off the kind of leadership that would reside in the community, because money gives you options to leave, and when you leave, the kind of centralization of power in Brooklyn or in Harlem that we once enjoyed, that could send a congressperson or city council person back over and over again, is simply not there anymore.
Well, actually, your church is unique in many ways, as having not only an indigenous congregation, but still bringing back middle class who have left to live in other parts of the city and outside the state. Do you get the sense, as you talk to your congregants, that they understand the mutuality of concern, at least not in terms of coming back and leading, but in terms of providing resources to help the fight?
I have no question in my mind, because those who live in Garden City, those who live in Fort Lee, those who live in Westchester, County, who come back, they understand very clearly, and they respond very clearly to that understanding, that their resources that they put into the institution are really used for the betterment of the community in which the institution finds itself. Of course, the real challenge is to not just get those who come from outside of the community back to the church, but to get more of the people who are located in the community to come to the church.
And participate.
Yes.
It raises a follow-on question. I had a discussion with the head of a major civil rights organization recently, and I complained. We were at a fundraiser, and I looked around. This is clearly one of our leading vanguard national organizations. And I looked around at a fundraiser, and I didn't see any African Americans in particular attendance. It was a collection, basically, of very progressive people, but there were virtually no African Americans. And I looked down their funding list, and I couldn't see us there. I'm wondering, are we running a risk now, both nationally and locally, that key institutions that fought for us during the civil rights movement, really, when you look at them, aren't funded and supported by our own communities? What is that going to do? Can we make serious fights, when we have this disjunction?
I don't believe we can. When we were doing the campaign against negative billboard advertising, that's one of the things we ran into. We asked organizations not to accept money from the RJRs and the Philip Morrises of the world, and quite frankly, they couldn't do it because their support was there. Even the Congressional Black Caucus receives some monies from these corporations. With more and more money coming from outside of our community, it neutralizes us and does not give us the same kind of force and ability to express our frustrations and anger, because we're afraid of losing the dollars that keep so many people employed. And it's Brother Jones, it's a small amount of money, comparatively speaking. And let me tell you, I was down at the National Urban League's conference in New Orleans, and I was the preacher for their religious opening. and I made reference to one of the corporations that had made a statement that they had given the National Urban League. It was either 100,000 or $1 million anyway, but it was over a 5-year period. And everybody was so elated about it. Now, this particular organization has a very provocative commercial on television, and we all know it very well. I won't mention it on the show. But my statement, not directly at them, but, you know, that's no money, folks, for us to be falling down and, you know, saying, you know, thank God for this very generous person or corporation that's giving us this money. And it's one of the reasons why economic development and the demand for public money so that we can create the kind of private wealth that will empower our communities. I want us to get away from, and by no means have I thought how we can do this effectively, completely, but I want us to get away from being in a position where we're always at the mercies of a beneficent organization or beneficent person or people. And that seems to be the path that we have chosen, that we are constantly looking for this corporation, this organization, along with the federal government, to give us money. And if they don't, we find ourselves paralyzed. I believe deeply in the public-private, community-based partnership. But I also think that the community-based organizations ought to look forward to the ownership of capital and the means of production. It's another way of saying 40 acres and a mule. It's not quite that in the 21st century, but it's the only way we can truly be free economically.
I think a group of us are in strong agreement with what you say. I think, as a matter of fact, as many of us look at the issue of what happened on welfare reform in the Congress, and also looked at the attacks on affirmative action and the attacks on the congressional representation that's going on, is not only a question of a change in the Congress, but also the inherent weakness of the institutions that we have to do this kind of fight.
The analysis behind what has taken place recently in federal government and state government has been lacking among the organizations that we normally depend upon. For instance, the NAACP may have done an analysis, but the kind of getting that information to the grassroots is non-existent. The Urban League, who has had always a strong policy of making sure that people of African descent were in key positions in corporate America, those positions are being taken away quickly. So no, those organizations are not doing this kind of work, and we are the poorer for it, but they're not doing it, I think, largely because many of them are being controlled by corporations and individuals who really don't want to see that done.
Though I guess in my argument with this unnamed national group, I said one of the ways to get this kind of exchange, and I don't think the organization need to be funded entirely out of the African American community, but it would be nice to see a third of the resources. They have to start making overtures to the people you're talking about who are coming as congregants. I don't see that overture. I see basically the boards being more reflective of corporate America. And not corporate America, even in terms of corporate America particularly beholding to the African American community. And I'm wondering, this is a two-sided dance here. I don't know if the ask has been made effectively to our middle class I think now may be the opportune time. I think even the most dense person who thinks they're far away from all the problems that you see in Harlem, I see in Bedford-Stuyvesant and the rest of the city, must recognize that something's unraveling, if not for them, for their kids. And I think that's clearly taking advantage of this opportunity as we go along.
Well, to be fair, first of all, I don't think the appeal has been made as directly as it can be by the leadership of these organizations. But to be fair, I think it also must be said that even where the appeal does reach out,
it's not being responded to yet. And there is a serious question in my mind about what the level of resources are. Let me give you an example, but it encourages me. We have about 9 African-American business persons who have put significant money on the table in community development projects. I'm very proud of them. I think they're wonderful. And not only have they put their money there, but they are keeping it there, and they continue to add on to it. So there is potential. But these women and men are unique.
And so when you ask a person of African descent who may have $250,000 in the bank, you know, that's liquid, and give $10,000 to the United Negro College Fund, the NAACP, the Urban League, because we need that kind of contribution. The numbers of people who could do that really do not seem to be as large as we think. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not sure on that, but the more and more I try to reach out and find people in our community who have those kinds of monies, either they hide themselves very well or they talk a good show, but when it comes down to putting the money on the wood, it doesn't happen.
I see another thing that goes on that is really a force of the society. When someone breaks free, they use their charitable dollars to move their career forward. So you have seen some prominent African Americans put enormous resources, for instance, for some significant non-minority law schools, for instance, enormous by any character. And clearly these are contributions to charities that they see as critical to their own career development and interest. I think the other issue is, can we show the kind of delivery in the church-based sector, in the not-for-profit sector, of the kind of connection and direct results that so much of American philanthropic giving has been moved towards.
I would offer, without boasting, that we've taken 50,000 and made it into 50 million, that we continue to grow. In a community like Harlem, we've been able to find women and men, business persons, who have some dollars to put them together. And I would think that if you have in your churches and in your not-for-profits the kind of leadership that is concerned primarily with community development, is secure in its own right, you know, and is willing to take the risk of being perhaps at odds with a significant sector of society so as to enhance the building of our own community, then it can be done. Leaders who write weekly in our papers on the urban agenda, leaders who will speak to our national organization unapologetically, and women and men who are accountable. You see, I keep holding up these several business persons who have come together with their resources, and one of the reasons they say that they stay in this is because they see that what they call the leadership is accountable and accessible. Right. In other words, we're not running from them. They can get to us, and they have a significant say-so in what goes on. I think that's very possible in our communities, but our governments, city government, Mr. Giuliani, state government, Mr. Pataki, federal government, Mr. Clinton right now, I don't know what you all in the listening audience think over the next few weeks, but those entities have to funnel the resources, significant resources, and the private sector. I must say that Chase Bank has been tremendously supportive in the Pathmark and some other things that we're doing. The private sector, they have to channel significant, not token, significant dollars. And I will say this to you. I'm aware that when you really negotiate for significant dollars in the private sector, it's like High John the Conqueror of the African-American folklore of South Carolina. Massa, I can beat you making money. And if you demonstrate that you can make money and build, the chances of, quote, Massa helping you are slim. And I have some real experience on that, because I've been growing up, and, you know, the guys in front of me said, look, Butts, when you go to the table, don't accept the crumbs. You ask for the loaf. That's where we've always fallen down. We've accepted crumbs. So I went to the table and asked for the loaf. And so they said, well, I don't think that you're really understanding what you're asking for. Bring us your business plan. Brought the business plan tight as an headroom. And when we really got down to the brass tacks, no, when you're really dealing for the loaf, no, take these crumbs and shut up.
Let me just echo what you're saying here. As you know, I'm chairman of the board of Carver, and it's been an education, though I used to do this kind of work years ago when I was a lawyer at a large law firm. I found, and I was asking basically, how banking transactions really go in African American and Latino neighborhoods. And increasingly, because of the cost of banking, people, as you know, are going to check cashing operations. Right. It was my assumption that these operations were basically mom and pop organizations. was I shocked to start to understand that many, if not most, are controlled by as wholly owned subsidiaries of larger banking institutions. And we're sort of hemorrhaging out of the very poorest communities in the city of New York enormous wealth just through that, because there's an incredible fee. They don't pay you for your money, you pay them, basically, at almost no risk. And it was an interesting engagement of how can we start to recirculate money, and just the way you're talking about.
And I think that that kind of observation shared with our listening audience is exactly the kind of thing that must be said over and over and over again in our communities, and exposing the kind of exploitative relationships that now go on. So while a banking institution may give you some crumbs, or they may give you some significant dollars to do some major development, at the same time, the money that they're making on the other side is huge. So that's why I say we should be always unapologetic about demanding more, and more.
How do we get more voices together? And this is my last question. I mean, it's, you know, I've talked to you. I don't hear this being talked about in a great deal. Why are there so few voices coming together and talking this way?
One, I think we have been, some of our more vocal and radical leadership has been severely punished, brought down to the very ground, so that, you know, we've got to really pray and work to, you know, to keep them together. Secondly, those who have not been punished have been, I don't want to say bought, but they have been silenced because they are in positions where if they do speak out, their positions are threatened, their income is threatened, and their organizations that they lead perhaps are threatened. So that kind of fervor is not there. We need more of it.
Thank you. Cut off by a conservative Congress looking for an easy fix to budget problems, the poor in this country are facing the most drastic cuts in social welfare programs in 60 years. To meet the challenge, a new generation of leaders, people like the Reverend Dr. Butts, is needed to redefine our goals. We can't allow America to turn its back on the weak, the sick, and children in poverty. As residents of the richest country in the history of civilization, they deserve to be treated with the dignity all its citizens deserve. This is David R. Jones for the Urban Agenda.
To comment on the Urban Agenda or for more information on CSS, contact Community Service Society of New York, 105 East 22nd Street, New York, New York, 10010. Area code 212-254-8900.